I was just reading a book. All of a sudden I heard a guy screaming. I turned around and the guy sitting right next beside me was standing up and stabbing another guy with a Rambo knife.
A mentally ill man removed the life of a soon-to-be father and entertainer while in a long-distance bus in the most disturbing of circumstances imaginable. How would you feel if someone murdered your spouse and was released back into society less than a decade later? Warning: do not go looking for case files for today's video. You will be scarred for life. Welcome back to Dark Narratives. On this channel, we go over a lot of true crime and dark topics. If these kinds of videos pique your interest, please consider subscribing. And to encourage discussion or justice versus rehabilitation, please be sure to hit the thumbs up button on this video. Without further delay, let us begin. Real quick, I made a mistake with my last video and I would like to apologize to anyone that I offended with it. In that case, the household was raised under a blend of different spiritual beliefs and not exclusively Islam. I am very sorry to anyone that I have offended, and I will try to do better moving forward with each and every single video that I make. In today's case, we are going to a rural part of Canada. A bus has stopped while passengers are screaming, panicking, shouting, and nearly trampling over each other to get off of that bus. As soon as they get off, some are vomiting and others are crying, and emergency services are being contacted to come to the rescue. But what could possibly cause this level of commotion and panic? To get our answers, we're going to need to rewind quite a bit. On April 30th, 1968, in this tiny part of Liaoning province of China, which you can see is just coincidentally close to North Korea, a baby named Li WeiGuang was born. Not much is known about his early childhood, but his Wikipedia page indicates that he graduated from Wuhan Institute of Technology. Modern day, this university is on par with many public universities in America and others around the world. From 1994 to 1998, he began working in Beijing as a software engineer, leaving his tenure at whatever company he was working at just as the dot-com bubble began, and not at its height. He took the English name Vincent Li, and at some point while he was in China, married a woman who bedazzled him, named Anna. No information is available on what Vincent did from 1998 to 2001 while he was in China, but I have some theories that we can explore later. In 2001, he immigrated to Canada with his wife, began working odd jobs for a church in 2004, and everything else that took place in between is entirely speculation, which is something that we can entertain for now. Before we go theory crafting on what exactly was going on in Vincent's mind at this time, we need to lay out the information that we already have on Vincent. Without access to his resume, the best we can do is postulate what happened during this time frame with almost no information available on his wife, Anna. It was reported that Vincent spoke broken English, and if he did not have any IELTS or TOEFL test scores to benchmark his level of English, it would have been difficult for employers to understand whether or not he can communicate sufficiently with coworkers and therefore fulfill job responsibilities. With these kinds of issues, the sword cuts both ways. I've personally seen people who were architects in their own countries who were unable to do this work in other countries, specifically due to language barriers. This does not strictly apply to foreigners who are moving to America or Canada. And now I present to you two theories. Theory number one is that we have a happily married couple in China who own a house and Vincent retired early, but the wife, Anna, might have wanted to try living abroad somewhere else. In Chinese families, the saying goes, happy wife, happy life, and oftentimes zero input is allowed from the husband. They moved to Canada just after the dot-com bubble ended, discovered an increase in the cost of living, and simply had more and more stress as Vincent could not find adequate employment in the same line of work that he was doing in Beijing. Now it's time for theory number two. Anna could have been a Chinese-Canadian woman, which would have allowed Vincent a method to fast-track himself to Canadian citizenship. I've never had the need to immigrate to Canada, and this topic is alien to me. As of 2023, any foreigner who wishes to apply for a Canadian work permit must indicate willingness to leave Canada at the end of their work permit. But Vincent was granted citizenship in 2005. For all records available on Vincent, they indicate that he was employed in many other jobs that paid minimum wage or close to minimum wage in Canada. This ranged as anything from a McDonald's employee, a Walmart employee, a janitorial services employee, a car mechanic at one point, and even a forklift operator. This kind of work is a far cry from the work that Vincent had studied for at his university in Wuhan, and may have put him under scrutiny of not only his wife, but perhaps his own immediate family. It is entirely possible that the attitudes from his own family could have varied anywhere on the spectrum of, "You had a great job in Beijing, why are you doing this kind of work now?" to, "You are an absolute failure of a son to me. We paid for your schooling at one point at one of China's greatest universities to study what you wanted to study, and now you're doing this kind of work?" Now, once again, all of this is speculation, as we do not have a complete picture into the personal life of Vincent, but it is highly likely that he felt some level of stress or another from his jobs, expectations from his family and his wife, and what is undoubtedly some level of introspection that he could very well be upset with his own career choices. The most professional job position Vincent ever held since arriving in Canada was that of a forklift driver. In Asia, on the whole, it is a frequent trend for married couples to separate without ever officially divorcing, especially in marriages that involve middle or late-aged individuals. I've seen this with my own two eyes, at least on two separate occasions, and there were times that Anna and Vincent had separated but gotten back together on at least one occasion. During this time frame, there was a young man named Tim McLean, who was the absolute definition of full of life growing up and enjoying his adolescent years. Born in Winnipeg, Timothy Richard McLean was described as the boy who would still stand up and run around while all of his friends were tired and resting. Going by Tim for short, he was described as the life of the party and the kind of guy who had a smile on his face everywhere he went and a friendly handshake to everyone that he met, whether it was a stranger on public transportation or somebody that he worked with. With the kind of friendly and outgoing personality that Tim had, it should be no surprise that he decided to work at a carnival in his later years. Tim was not only a performer for various events going on with the carnival group that he worked with, but also a barker, one of those friendly people that tries to bring in large families and curious attendees to whatever attraction was available at the carnivals that he worked at. The one thing that Tim loved the most about his work was that he could travel all over Canada and meet new people. He was also a massive fan of vlogging before it developed and matured into what it is today on YouTube and other platforms, stating proudly, boldly, and happily to his parents that one day he would be famous, but he didn't know how he would become famous. One day, he met a very nice young woman named Colleen Yestro, and they hit things off quite nicely. She was obviously very charmed by his outgoing and friendly personality, as well as his happy-go-lucky attitude. They were very likely planning to tie the knot, as Colleen was pregnant with his first child. They certainly had the picture-perfect image of a family going for them, not so far off in the future. But then, he crossed paths with Vincent Li. Coming back to the Greyhound bus, it was in the middle of a long-haul trip on July 30th of 2008. At 6:55 p.m., the bus had made a quick stop at Ericsson, allowing the passengers to get off, take a break, stretch their legs, and buy things at a convenience store nearby. Tim was about to go to sleep when he greeted Vincent with a friendly wave as Vincent took a seat next to him near the back of the bus, close to the bathroom. Tim put his hat on his face, his MP3 player's earbuds in his ears, and began snoozing. Approximately 1 hour later, Vincent unpacked a hunting knife and then began stabbing at Tim McLean's neck and chest. Letting out a chilling scream, Tim tried to jump over Vincent and landed in the walkway of the Greyhound bus while passengers started panicking and trying to get off of the bus while Vincent continued stabbing at Tim. All of the passengers were off of the bus, although 2 of them tried to re-enter to see if they could save Tim or persuade Vincent to stop attacking him. But by then, Vincent had already begun the process of decapitating Tim's lifeless body. Upon these two passengers re-entering the bus, Vincent approached them with his knife. These two passengers then went back out the front door of the bus, but not before the bus driver was able to close and lock the door permanently with a special button at the front of the bus. The bus driver then exploited another part of the bus to prevent Vincent from escaping. Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived on the scene at 8:30, placing the exact time of this attack as somewhere between approximately 8:10 to 8:20 p.m. In short summary, Vincent had decapitated Timothy and began parading his head around the bus, giving the passengers a disturbing view of this spectacle. As though this were not already enough, he then began dissecting Tim's lifeless body, removing the organs, and eating various parts of them, including 1/3 of Tim's heart. Now, I would like to take a short break here and state this channel's mission, which includes but is not limited to raising awareness of mental health problems, social situations, and environments that create these problems, the importance of law enforcement personnel and armed forces doing their jobs correctly with humane methodology, and, when possible, remembering and honoring victims. Once again, do not go looking for the crime scene photos or case files for this situation, and for the sake of preventing situations like the one in this video from taking place, please consider hitting the like button below. From this day forward, every video that I upload will have links that people seeking mental help can use to find these resources. I will only use .org or .gov domains or websites, and I have no intentions of seeking profits by promoting these kinds of services. If you guys need these kinds of services, please check the description below this video. Now, let's get back to our scheduled programming. A 5-hour-long standoff that was hotly debated long after it took place ended with Vincent trying to break open a window at the back of the Greyhound bus to attempt to escape from law enforcement. Upon exiting the bus through the window, Vincent was shot twice with a taser, arrested, and placed in the back of a patrol car. There were plastic bags inside the bus that contained body parts from Timothy, and upon interrogation, parts of Tim's face were discovered in Vincent's pockets. Greyhound Bus 1170 was officially declared a crime scene, and this meant that none of the passengers were allowed to retrieve their luggage. Greyhound had to put all of the passengers into a hotel for the evening and then arrange for a new bus to pick them up and deliver them to their final destination of Winnipeg the next day at 3:30 in the afternoon. One other small detail is that Greyhound had to also help these passengers buy some new clothes because they were not allowed to retrieve their luggage. Upon interrogation, Vincent stated that he was told by God that he was the second coming of Christ and that he was sent by God to save the people from an alien invasion, and that the aliens lived amongst and were disguised as ordinary human beings such as you and I. He also claimed that he was the third story of the Bible. Evaluation by a psychiatrist over the course of 10 to 20 encounters led the psychiatrist to diagnose Vincent with schizophrenia. Ultimately, Vincent would be found not guilty by reason of insanity in the Canadian court system, a ruling that both the defense and the prosecution were in favor of. He was admitted to the Selkirk Mental Health Care Center in Manitoba on March 3rd, 2009. He was responding to therapy positively and in 2010 was allowed supervised outdoor walks that slowly evolved into unsupervised releases for up to a full day at a time in May of 2015. This led to complete discharge issued by the Manitoba Criminal Code Review Board on February 10th of 2017. In summary, Vincent Li's punishment lasted less than a decade and seemed to lean a bit more towards rehabilitation than punishment. The aftermath and the impact that this incident had on everyone on the bus and involved with the case is much more than you might expect. It's one thing to witness, investigate, and interrogate a murderer in a murder case. It's quite another to see one where absolute mutilation of a body takes place while you're in the middle of nowhere, listening to the screams of other witnesses to the crime taking place and watching some of them puke because they're so shocked. Not to mention, there's nowhere else to run but to stay as close to other passengers for your own safety as possible. One RCMP officer who was on the scene when Vincent committed this crime, Corporal Ken Barker, took his own life in 2014. His family members stated that he had PTSD. 2 passengers of the Greyhound bus, who will remain unnamed, tried to file a lawsuit against Vincent, Greyhound, the RCMP, and the Canadian government for being present to this atrocious act, but later dropped the lawsuit. And by the way, each of these 2 passengers was seeking $3 million in damages in the lawsuit. At the time that the attack took place, Greyhound coincidentally had an advertising campaign with the slogan, "There's a reason you've never heard of bus rage." They immediately both terminated the advertising campaign and removed it from all billboards that they could. 5 months after the passing of Timothy, his girlfriend Colleen had given birth to a baby boy. This resulted in custody battles between Tim's own mother and the mother of Tim's child. Last but certainly not least, the family of Tim McLean still seek justice for the loss of their young son, despite apologies from Vincent Li delivered to the media. This case is as random and as gruesome as it gets. It bears a little bit of similarity to the case of Ronald Lee Haskell Jr., who pled insanity under similar circumstances, but in Ronald's case, he was ruled sane due to clear premeditation. So, I have a question for you all to answer in the comments. If Vincent Li had committed the same exact crime under the same exact circumstances in the state of Texas, do you all think that he would have been found not guilty by reason of insanity in court? Or do you think that he would have faced punishment to the fullest extent of the law in the state of Texas? Once again, please let me know in the comments below. On a closing note, I want to rebuff on the statement that his parents made when they heard Tim McLean say that he knew he would be famous one day. Back in those days, YouTube had only just begun to get 480, 720, and 1080p options for viewers, and he started vlogging even before it was called vlogging. If he was still around to this day, he might have gone on to become a great YouTuber. With that, we conclude the case of Greyhound Bus 1170. To remember and commemorate victims, as well as bring attention to mental health problems, please consider hitting the thumbs up button below. If you think you'll be back for a future video, consider subscribing. And as always, remember that every day is a new opportunity to see the light. Until next time, I bid you all farewell.